Hello Traveler, and welcome to part 1 of the Invokation Akademy Review Session for version 4.8. Well, after the giant update last time, thankfully we have a fairly small patch with only 3 new characters and 5 new action cards. But to no one's surprise, we have a lot of very impactful balance changes to discuss that target a lot of the meta decks throughout last patch. Plus, wouldn't you know it, plunging attacks are finally getting a bit of love. Now, because of the sheer number of balance changes we have to talk about, we're going to do something a little bit different and just go over those today and leave all the new cards for later. So let's jump straight into those, starting with our nerfs. First up is Consecrated Serpent. This card was by far the most broken card released last patch because of how insane the draw was on the skill. Well, that is now being changed to draw only 1 card, which is a huge downgrade to the previous ability, which was often 1 block and 2 cards. To compensate, the damage did go up from 2 to 3. Now, honestly, a 3 damage skill that draws a card is still fairly decent. However, this is a huge downgrade to Serpent, which really relied on that draw to fill your hand with energy blocks to power its burst. Now, without that extra draw, it's going to be a lot harder to have enough blocks in hand to actually threaten a large Serpent burst, and in combination with the next change we're about to talk about, will probably kill off Serpent for good. Because not only did Serpent get a nerf, but Bone Cruncher energy blocks did as well, and quite a significant one. When played, they still discard a card to generate a die, but now they no longer generate any energy for Consecrated Beasts. I'm actually not a huge fan of this change, as while the blocks were really good before giving energy, it was mostly balanced around the burst of the Consecrated Beast being a little bit weaker than normal bursts when you have no energy blocks, requiring you to spend cards to buff them up. The main culprit before was Serpent's skill drew you so many cards that doing this was trivial. Well, now with the Serpent nerf, blocks actually would be pretty fair, but with this change, it's going to be pretty hard to justify playing the Consecrated Beast anymore, and we may see them out of the competitive meta for good. Well, while short-lived, they certainly did have a huge impact for that one version. Narwhal 2 got a slight nerf with the damage cap on his skill going down from 5 to 4 maximum. This means now you cap out at 12 stacks for a total 5 damage skill. Overall, this is not really going to matter all that much, as the primary deck that could get to 15 stacks easily was the Consecrated Beast Narwhal deck, which is no longer going to be a thing, and Carve Whale decks would rarely get up to that many stacks. Lumenstone is getting a huge change, going from 2 aligned to 3 unaligned dice. If you're paying attention in 4.7, pretty much every deck was playing Lumenstone. After all, by the end of 3 rounds, it not only gives you an extra die, but 2 extra cards as well, a huge amount of value. Games could often be decided with who drew more Lumenstones in round 1 and who didn't. At 3 costs, not only does it take longer to break even on dice, but it also really prevents you from having those big double Lumenstone openings. We might still see this played for some very combo-centric decks, but it'll probably rely a lot more heavily on getting discounted by Seed Dispensary. Still, this is a fair change just based on its usage rate, and we probably will be seeing it less going forward. But it's not just Lumenstone. After 2 gilded nerfs that didn't really affect its play rate too much, we finally get a nerf to Liar Song. Now, sometimes it will keep its original effect to discount 2 dice the next time you play an artifact, but now it only does it if you haven't yet played an action card this round, meaning Liar Song has to be the first card you've played this round, similar to the limitation on Cassava. If you've already played a card, then you only get half the discount, just 1 dice. Okay, this one's a bit tricky to evaluate, but I do think it will be quite effective at reducing the consistency of gilded decks quite a bit. One thing you may have noticed, those decks ran a lot of card draw, even so far as playing Countdown to the Show 3 for its full cost. Part of the reason for this was the Gilded Liar Song combo was just so important to the deck, and sometimes you really wanted to spend dice on card draw just so you could draw into Liar Song. However, now with this change, if you do play a card draw spell into Liar Song, it means you always get the smaller effect. Mechanically, I do like this change. It still enables you to play Liar Song for its original effect on some turns, but other turns will lean more on other effects like Timaeus or Golden House to make up for that lost discounts. The decks are still playable, but this does reduce their consistency by quite a bit, which was honestly the main issue. One thing to keep in mind though, the discount you get off Liar Song is locked in when you play it, not when you actually use it. So for example, if Liar Song was the first card you played on your round returning a Heart of Cavarena, you could replay Heart as the next card and still keep that 2 dice discount later. Now the one thing I don't like about this change is this will probably cause players to make a lot more mistakes playing their cards in the wrong order. Treasure decks are also taking another hit. Each character can only receive healing from treasure once a round. Yep, you can no longer spam treasure on a single character to heal them for a ton of HP while generating dice at the same time. This is a pretty significant change, as the majority of decks still playing treasure like Nuvalet and Risley decks really did rely on that healing to keep those hyper carries alive, as well as comboing with equipment like Veterans and Marechaussee Hunter. Without being able to stack that healing, those characters and artifacts are going to be much worse. Unfortunately, it also means Huntao and Rightful Reward are also pretty dead. We could still see decks playing treasure for dice, but honestly the healing was really important in a lot of matchups. With this change, we might see treasure shift back towards more stall and value-oriented strategies rather than combo, as you now want to play treasure over multiple rounds to get maximum value. Kave, who's been a menace all patch, will no longer, with a pretty significant nerf to his burst scans, which no longer gain an additional damage and deal damage now equal to the cost of the card. While this feels like a small change, this has one huge implication. Previously, the 3-cost Kave deck needed this bonus damage in order to do 10 damage to a character in the first round with either Mona or Farina. After this change, the combo only does 9 damage. Now, overall, this seems like a fair nerf, as Kave decks were a bit too powerful for how easy they were to play, but unfortunately this change is going to hurt Kave decks quite a bit, and it's really not worth it anymore to run the all 3-cost deck. You sacrifice quite a lot playing all those action cards that you mostly can't use, and without a 10 damage combo, it's not going to be worth the trade-off. Luckily though, it's possible now a 2-cost location-based Kave deck could be a little more playable. Yunjin, the other terror of the meta, is also getting a nerf to her flag formation status, which no longer adds bonus damage, but still retains its dice discount. Her burst is being increased from 2 to 3 initial damage, but that's not nearly enough to compensate for the damage loss on her status. So what does this mean for Yunjin? Well, she's now a lot weaker without Primordial Jadewing Spear, as even with talent equipped and enabled and a weapon, her normal attacks are only doing 5 instead of 6 damage, which, as we've seen with Ito nerfs, was an important breakpoint. Of course, if you do have Wing Spear equipped, it's not that different, as you're now doing 7 instead of 8 damage, which is going to take out characters all the same. Overall, this seems like a pretty nice change, as it still lets you play Yunjin combo, but cuts its consistency down a little bit by making you more reliant on the weapon. Hopefully, this will make her feel a little bit more fair. As for the other noted change to Yunjin, this was mostly to fix that interaction with her status and Nuvalet's prepared normal attack. Now, her talent only gives that +2 damage buff to that first initial hit and not on the follow-up attack, which really is how it should have worked in the first place. And our final nerf, Kusava, is being changed from 0 to 1 cost. This one's a bit of a surprise, as competitively speaking, we weren't really seeing Kusava being played, but the card is pretty powerful, and with the other strategies taking a hit, perhaps this is a little bit preemptive to make sure that it doesn't become the next Lumenstone, especially as we're getting a few new discard synergies with the new characters. Unfortunately, at 1 cost, it's even more vital that you only play this in discard-oriented decks, like Apep or Chevreuse. And those are the nerfs. We've seen previous patches where they were pretty conservative with the nerfs, but you can see this time they went pretty aggressive on all the meta decks, with all the most played ones taking quite a hit. Conwell, of course, saw significant nerfs and is probably not playable anymore, while gilded-based decks like Herald Sayu Chongyun or Nuvalet Cube Agedaha also took a bit of a hit, but we'll probably still see them, just not as dominant. Finally, Yunjin and Kave, while not really appearing that much competitively, were pretty hard to deal with for casual players, and these nerfs should help a lot with that. Overall, really happy with these changes, even though I think the Consecrated Beast one does go a little bit too far. But we're not done. Not only do we have those nerfs, we have a great round of buffs as well to some lesser played characters. So let's jump into those, starting with our TCG mascot, Sino. First, his passive effect remains unchanged, giving you Electro Infusion at 2 and a +2 damage buff at 4. But now he gets to keep this final stage of his buff until 8 stacks instead of 6 previously, before resetting back to 2, giving you an extra 2 rounds to use that damage. This is actually super useful, as there were some situations you'd sometimes find yourself in where bursting on Sino would actually cause you to lose damage by resetting you back down to 2 stacks. With a cap of 8, much less likely to do that in a normal game, which makes Sino burst much better now. Not only that, his talent got a great buff. It no longer has that weird odd or even clause, and now has 2 effects. First, anytime you use his skill, it'll increase your passive by 1 stack, and also once a round provides a +2 damage bonus if you're above 2 stacks. Both of these effects are a huge upgrade. First off, you no longer have to rely on his burst anymore to get up to 4, and the talent gives you that +2 buff as early as round 2. This change to the damage bonus means Sino is a little less all in on a single round than before, but gets a much more consistent damage bonus, which is honestly much better. Sino with talent equipped looks pretty scary, so if you are a Sino fan, great time to try him out. Lisa is getting a small upgrade and will now apply her conductive stacks on the opponent when you use her burst. Pretty big fan of this change as well, as it always felt really weird to use her burst when it has no relevance to her main mechanic. Applying conductive could effectively be a 1 or 2 damage buff to that burst, so definitely much better than before. Zhongli's talent was reworked a little bit. Instead of buffing Geo Summon damage while shielded, it now checks for Zhongli being above 7 HP. And additionally will buff Zhongli's personal damage as well as summons. Honestly, I'm not too sure if this is actually a buff or not, as it was honestly easier to keep Zhongli shielded a lot of the time than it would be to keep him above 7 HP. But the fact that Zhongli himself does get that damage bonus is pretty nice to enable his normal attacks to hit a little bit harder, particularly with Vortex Vanquisher. However, overall, I don't see this change as being much of a reason to play Zhongli or his talent. Okay, as I alluded to at the beginning, the rest of our changes are going to be themed around switching and plunging attacks, which I'm super excited about. I mentioned this previously in a stream, but I really wish they would improve plunging attacks, and well, looks like they're finally doing it. First off, the biggest change to Kazuha. His plunging attacks no longer get a +1 damage bonus, but instead when he has that status active from using his skill, switching to Kazuha is now not only a fast action, but causes you to immediately use a normal attack, dealing either anemo damage or the infused element. To compensate, however, both his skill and his burst are being reduced from 3 anemo to 1 anemo damage. While that sounds like a ridiculously huge nerf, one thing you have to be aware of, when you swap to Kazuha to use his plunging, you are getting that normal attack for free, which means the combination of using his skill, then spending 1 dice to swap back for a plunge is effectively 4 dice to deal 3 total damage with 2 potential elemental reactions. So effectively he has a broken up 3 damage skill, which could be pretty powerful. And what about his burst? Well, remember, now that Kazuha uses that plunging attack for free, he can generate 2 energy for just 4 dice. And that's why the burst had to go down in damage. Out of all the changes, this one is probably the one I'm most hyped for. If you don't already know, I love anemo characters, and this gives Kazuha a brand new identity that's totally unique among all the characters. Really excited for this change, and I think they did a great job redesigning Kazuha's kit into a really unique identity. But that's not all. Our other beloved plunging character, Albedo, is getting some upgrades too. First off, his summon no longer reduces the cost of plunging attacks, but instead it lets you switch as a fast action once a round. This is quite powerful, effectively getting a built-in Catherine for his skill. The plunging cost reduction isn't completely gone, it was moved to his talent, which still gives you that +1 bonus damage to plunge, but now also gives that 1 dice discount. Interesting to note, Albedo now is the only character other than Mona that can enable quick swaps innately in their kit. And because of that, I think Albedo might have some pretty good niche applications for decks that really want that effect. In fact, there's no requirement at all to play with plunging attacks in his base kit. If you do want to play with plunges, however, all you need to do is play the talent. Alright, in case we were having a bit too much fun with the new plunging mechanics, Mirror Maiden is back to ruin our day. For her change, effectively her skill and talent effects were basically swapped. Now, instead of buffing hydro damage by default, she now debuffs the swap by default, making it cost 1 more die for your opponent to swap off of a character for 2 rounds. Her talent still extends this debuff duration by 1, but now it's that talent that buffs hydro damage instead. This is actually a super cool change, as the ability to increase swap cost was pretty much the only reason you really wanted to play Mirror Maiden before, and having it tied to a talent was a pretty big downside. Now that she gets it built in, I can tell this change is going to be super annoying, but I'm really excited since Mirror Maiden has been weak for a little bit too long, and I'm hoping this unlocks a brand new type of deck. And 2 more changes to go with the swap theme. Dawn Winery got quite a big buff, still discounting swaps by 1 die, but now works twice a round instead of just once a round. This means that provided you actually want to swap around multiple times, this breaks even on dice the round you play it, which is a huge upgrade. Any deck that does want to swap around quite a lot is going to be really interested in this, as now each round you're effectively generating 2 dice. So stall decks that want to swap stall a lot or plunging attack decks could be interested. Falls in Fortune is now 0 cost. I really like this change, as I think the effect of Falls in Fortune is super fun for some decks, but 1 cost was simply too much to pay for that. But combined with the Mirror Maiden change, we might finally see some actual control decks focused on locking down your opponent's characters between freeze and swap attacks. And that is it for the balance changes, quite an extensive list. Other than the Bone Cruncher block change, the rest seem really great. Most of the dominant meta strategies rightfully got hit, and we have some really cool buffs to try with some lesser used characters and plunging attacks. If you are a newer player, be sure to attend the TCG 101 series to level up your Genius Invocation game. If there's anything you'd like to see in an upcoming video, drop a comment and I'll see how I can help. Be sure to enroll in our courses by subscribing so you can be notified when a new lesson is available. Until then, class dismissed.